Welcome back to the Bullpen podcast, where we bring you into conversations with the leaders shaping the future of business. Today, we're joined by Jeff Bennett, the founder and CEO of Morari, a groundbreaking sexual wellness company using neuromodulation technology to boost confidence, control, and performance. Jeff spent more than 25 years in the medical device world before launching Morari, and his journey blends innovation, leadership, and a bold vision for transforming men's health. Let's jump right into the bullpen, Jeff. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Drew. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. So let's jump into a little bit about your background. So you spent more than 2 decades in the medical device industry before founding Morari. What kind of moment or insight pushed you from a successful corporate track into launching your own sexual wellness company?
Yeah, well, I can say it wasn't in my career development plan when I first, graduated with my undergraduate and MBA. I went to a big corporate company, multi-billion-dollar company where I was working as a product manager. To be honest, sex tech CEO wasn't a part of my development plan, but I realized a big opportunity and unmet need that existed, and made the decision to leave a good paying corporate job with all the securities and stock options that go with it to really chase this opportunity. And honestly, it took me a while to get comfortable with that. How do I tell my wife that I want to quit this job and go into a startup? And not only go into a startup, but a startup with sex tech and sexual wellness. How do I tell my family and my friends? But once I made that decision to do so, the weight was lifted from my shoulders. Everybody was like, way to go. This is great. Go for it. And I haven't had anybody say, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. It's been quite the opposite. So, I felt liberated. I feel free and going after this opportunity.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me right to my next one, and obviously kind of getting a lot of the encouragement saying, wow, this is a great thing to do. What gaps or unmet needs did you repeatedly notice in that men's health space that made you confident in this technology that really needs to exist if I do it or otherwise?
Sure. Well, I spent 25 years in the med device industry. In the first 4 years, I was in neuromodulation, and we had a product that was used to treat chronic pain. Electrodes would be put in the body, and they would be activated, and those pain signals would be masked and temporarily halted. And there, I learned about using neural stimulation as a modality for treating various different conditions. I then went to another company and I spent 4 years in the urology business, and that's where I learned about sexual health and wellness and some of the unmet needs that exist. And specifically, early ejaculation. I'm one of the 70% of men out there that are looking to last longer. So I had this crazy idea based on my neuromodulation experience of what if we had a patch that we could develop that guys could wear to delay an ejaculation. So long story short is I recruited a technology advisor to kind of help out, with the technology opportunity, and we said, let's go. There's an opportunity here to develop something that could literally treat millions of men and improve their sexual health and wellness. So that learning and that experience at a big company directly translated to what I was trying to do to start up the company. Now, I had no prior experience at all. So that's where I felt, surrounding myself with people that have done this before, both from a fundraising standpoint and then actually how do you execute and build prototypes and test those and get the FDA clearance. I'm a marketing guy. When I was working for these big companies, I often ignored, the quality side, the regulatory, because I was focused on my lane. But now in my role right now, I got to think of everything, right? It's not just marketing, it's not just sales, it's quality, it's regulatory, it's all the things that go with it.
Yeah, and again, you big part about that stat, and obviously premature ejaculation really kind of being something that's relatively stigmatized. Not a lot of people are speaking about it or discussing it openly. What made you comfortable stepping into such a stigmatized category as a founder?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I mean, having that family and the professional support certainly helped. But then one of the aha moments for us was when Jimmy Kimmel talked about our product and made fun of me in his monologue on national TV. So we had issued a press release about our brand and some progress that we were making, and one of his producers happened to stumble across this press release. And they mentioned us in the show. Now, we had no idea that was going to happen. They didn't ask for our permission. They didn't need our permission. I just woke up one Friday morning and my commercial advisor was like, Jeff, you and the company just got roasted last night on Jimmy Kimmel. And I'm like, oh no, what does this mean? So when I saw that video, I'm like, this is gold. I mean, this is a great exposure opportunity. And yeah, he made fun of the product. Yeah, he made fun of me, but he also acknowledged that it was an issue. And that acknowledgement is priceless, right? And that's what we need. And having a comedian joke about it, but then get back to a serious tone was exactly what we're trying to do. Is, what my experience is, you've got to joke about this with people. You've got to open that conversation up in a way where people aren't going to feel embarrassed. But once you open that up, people are willing to have a serious conversation. And I think that Jimmy Kimmel example is a perfect example of that. And here you got this comedian, and then he, acknowledged a major issue.
Yeah, that's incredible, and yeah, definitely kind of you got to look of ways, and obviously being a marketing person yourself, you're kind of always looking at ways to how can we best approach this that people are going to be open to it, and maybe that does, yeah, and like you said, involves a little bit of humor and deflection at the start. But talking all about the product, Morari, let's jump into the product itself. Morari's technology uses neuromodulation, far from the typical wellness gadget. But how did you translate clinical principles into a safe, accessible wearable?
Well, first, it was really trying to understand what's the mechanism of action. How does an ejaculation occur? What triggers it? And how is that different than maybe an erection? And erections, it's all about blood flow in and out of the penis, whereas ejaculation, it's all a neural response. There's receptors, nerve receptors in the penis that, when get stimulated, transmit a signal up to the brain that says, hey, this feels good. The brain translates that back down to trigger an ejaculation. So knowing that, ejaculation is all about a neural response, that was our foundational piece of information to say, okay, now we need to build a product that uses neural stimulation. But it's got to be a product that's easy to use, easy to place, and something that has an app which allows users to personalize it. Because what we found early on is that everybody responds to neural stimulation differently. What setting works for you is going to be different than me. And that's where an app becomes really, really important. So those were our foundational elements of it. And then it was really working with the development team to come up with different product prototypes, iterations, do some early feasibility testing just to prove that the concept works. So we checked all those boxes off, and then it was like, okay, now we're at the point where we're ready to submit to the FDA. And that process was a long, expensive process, but we finally made it. I mean, we got an FDA clearance early this year, and now we're in the early stages of commercialization of the product.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit more about that regulatory aspect of things. And obviously, like you said, it's just kind of it's an expensive, it's a long process at times. It's a very complicated one. But what were some of the biggest technical or regulatory challenges that your team had to solve while developing the drug-free, app-enabled sexual wellness device?
Well, from an app perspective, knowing that there's personal information that people are inputting in that, we had to do a bunch of security testing just to make sure that it's safe in terms of the data. And that's something that the FDA required as part of our submission. They needed to have assurances that we had done the testing to make sure that, from a cybersecurity standpoint, the product was safe in terms of that data. And then it was really a question of like, hey, how do we get this product to stick or stay on the skin? And we wanted something that was strong enough to stay in place while there's movement going on, but gentle enough where you removed it, it doesn't feel like a Band-Aid that you're causing pain. So we worked with some external partners to find that material. And that is what we use to go ahead with the commercial version of the product. And then, of course, the electronics. This is neural stimulation, so we needed a battery. We need Bluetooth connect with the app. So how do you fit all those electronics into a form factor that isn't burdensome or large for the end user? So those were some of the challenges that the team overcame in terms of testing different prototypes and iterations. And we're on generation 1 of this. 5 years from now, the product will look completely different as we continue to iterate and evolve. But we wanted to get to a minimal viable product as quickly as possible to get market validation, right? And we had validation from early testing, but is this something that the general market would be interested in? And so far the signs are really positive that or we've got something that's that first generation MVP product.
Yeah, that's amazing, and obviously, kind of building that solution that you're looking for. It takes a lot of experience, and I know I've seen that your team has over 75 plus collective years of experience in urology and sexual health. What have you learned from some of the rest of your team in kind of getting this thing started? What are some other things that that you've maybe been able to bring from your past, more just in general medical device areas to help really bring this all together as one cohesive product?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing, I mean, this is my first gig as a CEO of a startup company. So I don't know what I don't know. And over the years, I tried to surround myself by some advisors that have done it, been there before. And one of the early pieces of advice that I got is you got to manage the highs and the lows. You know, that as a startup, you're going to have one day you're going to have something that's great. You're going to be riding, on cloud nine, but then the next call you might be down in the dumps again. So how you manage the highs and lows is really how you're going to be successful as a CEO because things don't go smooth. There's funding issues, there's quality, there's supply, I mean, you name it. There's things that are going to happen. And me not having done this before, I didn't want to be caught off guard. So I really used that advice to help guide me along and still do to this day because again one set of challenges is gone but there's another set of challenges, right? Whether that's manufacturing, lead times, funding, et cetera, et cetera. So those are things that will constantly for me look to help my advisors help me with that
Mhm.
team of 75 years of experience. There's a number of people in that have been in this role before that have taken products from concept to market to success.
Awesome. Yeah, let's definitely put a pin in that. I know I got one more question about building the product, kind of or surrounding the product itself. How do you balance that medical grade rigor with also the consumer friendly design, like you were talking about, not making you feel like a band-aid, needing to incorporate everything that fits well. How do you incorporate that into the consumer friendly design when developing a product that's meant to be both effective and discreet?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's something that, we continually ask ourselves is as we look to iterate this, what do we need to do to make it that consumer friendly version? Because what we found is in my years of the medical device experience, how you develop a product, how you launch a product, how you message a product to a clinician is a lot different than a consumer. Physicians and clinicians in general buy on data, whereas consumers in general buy on emotion. So how can we develop a
Mhm.
product that gets to that emotional appeal of that consumer, knowing that we don't necessarily yet have that data from an efficacy standpoint to satisfy the needs of the physician? And we made the conscious decision that let's go to the FDA and get approval from a direct consumer standpoint and not have to have, a guy go to a doctor to get a prescription because we know that in general, men don't like
Mhm.
to go to doctors, right? And especially with something embarrassing and stigmatized such as premature ejaculation. So we said, let's make sure that the clinicians are comfortable with this, but we need the data to launch. Whereas that consumer, just let them know that it's there, something new, something different, give that a try. So again, it depends upon, what market we're trying to go after, but we're collecting data now that we can then go back to the FDA and get indication expansion at some point in the future for the product.
Transitioning from an established medical device company to your own startup. You've talked a little bit about it already, but what are some leadership lessons that were really more important than ever, and what were some that maybe you had to kind of rethink the way you approach some things from anything you've learned from the past?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I mentioned earlier is just, managing the highs and lows. I mean, that's first and foremost the challenge there. And then also, I didn't appreciate how difficult fundraising is. I mean, it's scary to ask friends and family and others for money. I mean, it's one of the hardest things I've ever
Hmm.
had to do. And, we've had some success with it, but by no means are we done with that. So it's continually preparing, thinking of fundraising because when you're done with one round, the next round is there. So you're always fundraising. And for us, we have the added challenge of having a sexual health and wellness product attached to that. And there's many institutional funds that don't invest or don't have the experience. And most institutional investors invest in what they know. And not a lot of people know the industry right now. So finding those investors has been challenging, but we're still there. We're still making it in terms of, having the cash to do what we need to. But that was a big surprise for me, how difficult that was and how time consuming it was. And it's one of those, it's a numbers game. It's like you may have 100 meetings, but you just find that one. That's what you need to advance the ball moving forward.
Yeah, and kind of in terms of building a culture, and kind of coming from a very large, well-established company in the past, and kind of coming to a startup where a lot of that stuff is going to be different. How do you kind of build that culture of curiosity and innovation inside a company whose mission really touches a pretty personal, intimate area of the end user's life?
Yeah, well, if we have one board member who I'd say is pretty conservative in his thinking and thought process, and just getting him
Hmm.
to say the word ejaculation was a major win for us.
Hmm.
And that's where again, it's that culture needs to be open. You need to be okay about talking about sensitive topics, but make sure again, laugh about it, joke about it, and then that opens the door for those serious conversations. So that the culture where, there is that openness, there is that curiosity, there is that interest to understand the pain points that users are having, that openness in a culture needs to be there. And then that risk taking
Hmm.
is so important at an early stage. We're not going to have everything figured out perfectly. So we made the decision, let's go to the FDA from a safety perspective, get that approval, see if they approve it. And there were some things that we wanted to do that weren't in that submission that we thought maybe would get rejected, but it came back and we got approval. So that risk that we took to
Hmm.
not wait for everything to be done, but let's just go to the FDA with a small amount, paid off for us. So otherwise, you can't boil the ocean. You could just be continually throwing money after it to get this perfect product. Well, nobody has a perfect product.
Hmm.
So what's enough to get that approval, get it market, validate it, and then learn and improve and evolve from there.
Yeah, awesome. I think I've just got one more here for you, Jeff. But obviously, like you talked about, multiple generations and how 5 years from now, this product and its effects could really look a lot different than they do today. But kind of looking ahead into that next phase of both industry wide and internally, what does that innovation in sexual health look like for you? And how do you see Morari shaping the future of men's wellness?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everybody's talking about AI, and we've talked about what that means for us and our product moving forward. But even before AI, it's learning from our customers what's working, what's not. We know, for example, on our app, we've got 4 different settings that users can choose from. Well, we label the settings amplitude, frequency, pulse width. Those are too technical of terms. We got to make that more consumer friendly, right? So we've got this app. We got to learn from a consumer standpoint what are the right ways to design the GUI, the interface, and then the words, right? I mean, what frequency? What does that mean? Can we dumb that down to something that a consumer can understand? So that for us is going to be important because the app is going to be continually something that's critical and foundational to what we're doing. And in the current version of the app, it tracks the duration, the date, and you and your partner can rate level of satisfaction. That's all manual input. How do we leverage AI to learn that, right? And based on what you inputted, spit out something that can say, okay, based on this, here is what the settings should be. So as we learn what the settings are for someone, we want to evolve into you input your height, your weight, your age, your ethnicity, and it will spit out, okay, here's what the right settings should be for you. So there's a lot of opportunity there. It just really reduces the pain points that maybe consumers have. It's like, okay, I've got this. You're giving me 4 different options. Where do I start? Well, we'll learn that and then have the customers learn that as well by inputting their data in an anonymous way. So, I know it's going to look dramatically different 5 years from now, but how and what, who knows, right? I mean, this industry is moving so fast, and AI is moving so fast. It's hard to fathom, what it's going to be in 6 months, versus 5 years.
I think that wraps it up today. Jeff, thanks so much. I'm really excited to keep learning about the product and stay tuned as obviously as it evolves and kind of gains popularity in the marketplace. It certainly seems like it will. So, but that wraps up today's conversation with Jeff Bennett, the founder and CEO of Morari, what we've just been talking about. Huge thanks to Jeff for sharing his thoughts on and insights on innovation, leadership, and building technology that truly changes lives. If you've enjoyed this episode, hit follow, share it with someone who'd find value in it, and stay tuned for more conversations with the leaders who are redefining what business success looks like. Thanks for listening. See you next time in the Bullpen.